Sorry, guys. Okay, Lisa, everybody just rest. Rest and listen. Thank you for coming from Mama Ramblings. Just enjoy, guys, okay? I'm here now, Barb. I don't know if Carolyn, are you here? Because I was going to read Spooky New Jersey if you're here. If you're not, I'm going to go back to Spooky Florida, I think. Or wait, Davita, are you here? I let her know that I was here. I know she's upset, very upset at the moment. If she was here, I was going to do California. Hi, QB. Hey, just relax, guys. Yes, thinking of you, Davita. We love you. Hey, Meg. Okay, Meg hasn't been here in a long time. Okay, Kevin, please get your rest. You too, Nicole. Everybody's tired. Just sit back, lay back, and relax. You too, Muppets. Aurora. Meg, I'm going to let you pick. Do you want Spooky New Jersey? Do you want Spooky Florida? Do you want Spooky Michigan? And what's the last one? Spooky California. Love you too, Meg. Which one do you want? Take a pick. A pick. We're going to let Meg, she's our special guest tonight. Hey, Linda Gelb. Michigan? Okay. That's good. Yeah, I haven't even read any out of there yet. That'll be a good one. And Linda's going to read for us sometime too. Right, Linda? Your Aunt Something, it's called. Because we could do it here on StreamYards. Hi, Lisa Nia. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, Tammy. I know everyone's tired. Okay. Introduction. When my grandfather Lloyd was 9 years old, his parents packed their belongings and their 6 children into a wagon and moved from Ohio to Michigan, where they bought land to farm. For a year or two, they lived in Hillsdale County in the southernmost part of Michigan. But then Ezra John, my great-grandfather, heard of some farming opportunities in the town of Temple, Clare County, near the top of the state. Hey, Cole. So the family packed their wagons again and traveled north. Listening to family stories of that period, I am strongly reminded of the wild frontier, even though the move to Michigan happened after 1910. Ezra John built a 2-room tar paper shack for the family to live in. The parents slept in the big back room. The front room held the cooking stove and table. During the day, it was the family gathering place. All night, it was separated by a blanket on a rope. The 3 older boys, Lloyd, Vernal, and Ted, shared a double bed on one side, and the 3 younger girls, Ethel, Vera, and Wilma, shared a double bed on the other. The iron bathtub was filled with hot water once a week during the winter, so the children could take baths. As a boy, Lloyd chopped wood for the stove, carried water from the well, took care of the horse, and attended a one-room schoolhouse. We need Alicia Biso here. Hi, little lady. Rough and Ready. This is the anniversary of her daughter's passing. March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. It's 4 years now. 4 years ago today. So she has a hard time with it. Hey, Carolyn, sit back and relax. Not tagging. There you go. Davida. Good, Davida. I'm so glad you're here. Everybody's praying for you. Davida, we were reading Spooky Michigan. Or do you want to go to Spooky California because that's where you live and everything? Might, because this is your day, and I'm sure Meg's fine with it, right, Meg? We're going to, because Davida's having a hard time, we're going to go to Spooky California. I know you're cool with that, Meg. You won't take any offense. Morning, Barbara, and everybody that was at Carolyn's. Long time no see. Okay, Davida, just listen, okay? Haunted House, Fort Bragg. I was working for a Fort Bragg lumber company back in those days. I was the general caretaker for a large number of company properties, both timber and ranch. It was a lonely job. I spent most days on horseback, riding various circuits that took me into the foothills to check on fences, make sure gates were kept closed, and see that the cattle on the ranches had access to watering holes. My closest friends were my horse, Buck, and a large guard dog, inappropriately named Happy. That's funny. Happy didn't like me much, which was high praise indeed, considering that he alternated between despising and loathing the rest of the world. He would occasionally take a swipe at my hand and would growl if I patted him too often on the head. But he was company of a sort. No one ever bothered me when Happy was around. Okay, guys. Okay, Irene. I was courting a very nice young lady in Fort Bragg during my free time. She was a sweet girl. Happy had actually wagged his tail at her once and let her pat him on the head. A miracle. Lydia and I would go walking on Sunday afternoons after church, and her folks had invited me to dinner a few times. I was hankering to get me a wife and raise me a family. But Lydia was not the kind of girl to rush into that sort of thing, so my courtship was going more slowly than I would have liked. Still, I thought she would probably say yes when I proposed next week. I was happily musing on my future with Lydia that morning as Buck, Happy, and I set out. I was scheduled to ride the longest of my monthly circuits that week, so I had packed my camping gear and several days' worth of food. I was delayed quite a while with a down fence at the first property, and it was late in the afternoon when I finished my chores at the second. I started riding out toward the old Phelps place and realized suddenly that it wasn't going to have to be my last stop of the day. I shivered at the thought. I usually timed my visits to the Phelps place for around noon. It was an old abandoned property with a monstrous, decrepit Victorian house that was supposed to be haunted. It should have been a good resting place for the local deer hunters, but they would not go near it. The few that tried came away before midnight with tales of ghostly thumping noises, gasps, moans, and a terrible wet blood stain that appeared on the floor of the front porch and could not be wiped away. I'm not sure I want to camp there, Happy, I told my dog as I rode the overgrown trail that led to the abandoned house. Happy growled menacingly, which was his normal response to anything I said. Then he plunged into the undergrowth and disappeared after a rabbit. Still, I continued, now addressing my horse, if any of the fellows at work found out I camped outside the house, they would never let me hear the end of it. They're always daring me to spend the night there with the ghost of old man McInturf. Buck liked it when I spoke to him. He cocked his head and strutted a little bit, enjoying the nice weather and my company as much as I enjoyed his. No, Meg's fine with it. Meg's fine with it. Davita, I didn't think you were coming because I was going to read Spooky California, but I wasn't sure you got the message. Meg's cool with it. She's easy going. Yeah, I hope the horse is the hero too, Meg. I pondered the story of the Phelps place as I rode toward the mansion in the quiet of the late afternoon. Phelps was an Englishman who had purchased land some 20 miles from the Mendocino coast in the 1880s. He had built a huge, fancy Victorian house, all covered with gingerbread trimmings and surrounded by lovely gardens. He had fancy furnishings, including a piano and a huge library, shipped to him from England and brought in from the coast by wagon. Then, when everything was arranged to his liking, he had sent out party invitations to everyone within messenger range. And I mean everyone. Townsfolks, miners, schoolmarms, soldiers, ranchers, fishermen, loggers, everyone was invited and everyone was looking forward to the housewarming party. It would be the biggest social event of the year, with music and dancing and lots of food. Phelps roasted half a steer in a pit in the backyard. Sawhorse tables were set up with refreshments, and drinks were set out on the front porch. People arrived at the mansion in just about every type of conveyance known in the West, in buggies and wagons and pony carts, on horses and mules and donkeys, and even on foot. They came from miles around. Everyone was everyone who was anyone was there, and quite a number of people who might be considered nobodies too. In fact, the only one missing was old man McInturf's son-in-law. They had had a terrible fight that afternoon, and the boy had stalked off in a rage, threatening to get even with the old man. Versions of the story were whispered all over the party as the guests mingled and chatted, danced, ate, drank, and danced some more. Hi, whisper to me. Around midnight, the fiddlers took a recess to eat some dinner and rest. People broke up into small groups and roamed through the house and over the grounds. Old man McInturf stood on the front porch with some friends, chatting over the drinks table. Suddenly, there came a thunder of hooves rushing up the lane toward the grand house. A cloaked figure on a white horse rode toward the lantern-lit porch. McInturf put down his drink. That will be my son-in-law George come to the party at last, he told his friends as he went down the steps. Let me take a sip of my tea real quick. One second, guys. Hey, Cutie. Oh, this is good. I haven't had a hot drink in a long time. Help in my throat. George, is that you? He called as the cloaked figure stopped his horse just outside the pool of lantern light. There was a sudden movement, and then the loud reports of a gun firing twice. Old man McIntyre staggered backward, shot in the throat and chest. The cloaked man wheeled his horse and fled down the lane. His friends ran to the assistance of the old man. Did you see who it was? Phelps shouted, running to the porch to help carry McIntyre up the steps. No one had. They laid McIntyre down on the porch and tried to make him comfortable. He was bleeding heavily, and they were afraid to move him much. There was some talk of fetching the doctor, who was attending the birth. Now I got that out. Now my voice sounds weird. Sorry. I freed up. LMN. There was some talk of fetching the doctor, who was attending a birth and so had not come to the party, but everyone knew it was too late for that. Too much blood was lost. It was pouring from the old man's wounds and had pooled underneath his head. McIntyre coughed once, twice, a hideous gurgling, strangling sound that wrenched the hearts of all who heard it. Then he died. McIntyre's body was laid out on the sofa, and the once merry guests left in stricken silence. The servants came and wiped the red-brown blood stain off the floorboards. The next day, a wagon was brought to the front of the house, and his body was carried onto the porch. As the men stepped across the place where he died, blood began to pool around their boots, forming a wet stain in exactly the pattern that had been wiped up by the servants the night before. The men gasped in fear. One of them staggered and almost dropped the body. They hurriedly laid McIntyre in the back of the wagon, and a pale Phelps ordered the servants to clean up the fresh blood stain. They never could keep that part of the porch clean. Every few weeks, the damp blood stain would reappear. They tried repainting the porch a few times, but the blood stain would always leak through. Arrested for murder and imprisoned in the county jail, McIntyre's son-in-law died of a blood clot in the brain. A few months later, one of Phelps' servants went mad after seeing a terrible sight that made his head feel like it was going to explode. Folks started saying the house was haunted by the ghost of McIntyre seeking revenge. Phelps sold the house a few years later, and it changed hands a few times before Thank you, Kathy. Before being purchased by the lumber company. The house stood abandoned now and was slowly decaying. Hunters claimed that McIntyre's ghost still haunted the place. They said that strange lights appeared in the windows and horrible sounds could be heard there after dark. Each time I visited the place in broad daylight, I would look at the sagging front porch to see if there was a blood stain there, but all the boards were weathered gray, just like the rest of the decaying house. As I rode up the lane to the house, Happy burst out of the underbrush, darted through the skeletons of dead apple trees in the orchard, and danced around me and Buck, barking and capering madly. In the late afternoon light, I looked up at the decrepit mansion with its sagging porch, broken windows, and weathered gray, warped siding. There were weeds everywhere in the overgrown yard, and the gate of the broken picket fence was hanging by one hinge. I led Buck to the well and gave him and Happy water to drink. I fed Buck some grain and tethered him loosely to a pine tree. Then I went to check the front porch. No blood stain. I made a fire on a bare patch in the front yard, and Happy and I ate some dinner. I wasn't too keen on the idea of sleeping in the house, and had just about decided to bed down outside near Buck when I heard a rumble of thunder. Dusk was coming swiftly, brought on early by the dense clouds gathering overhead. The air was heavy and damp. That decided me. There was no way I was sleeping out in the rain with shelter close at hand. I put Buck in the remains of the old stable. There was a bit of a roof left over one of the stalls, so I put him there and made him comfortable for the night. Then I took my sleeping roll, my rifle, and my lantern out of the saddlebag, and Happy and I made it to the house just as a vivid flash of lightning flashed overhead. Hey, Steph, you woke up. Hey, Mary, you made it. Now, where's cross-eyed Betty and Big Mama? Let's see. Followed by a thunderclap that nearly burst my ears. I lit my lantern and looked around. The house was dusty and mostly bare. A few old pieces of furniture were scattered through the front rooms. I looked up the staircase, but I decided I would rather stay close to the door in case I needed to make a fast exit. So I went down the hallway and found a few bedrooms in the back of the house. One room still had a door with a latch and an old iron bedstead with rusty but sturdy springs. I rolled my blanket out on the bed. Lightning flashed again. In the sudden light, I caught a comforting glimpse through the cracked glass of the window of Buck standing in the old stable. Then the heavens opened and rain began pounding down on the house and yard. I closed the door of the room, hoping that this would deter any ghost that might want to visit me, and lay down on the bed. Happy curled up on the floor and started snoring loudly. Even the heavy rain didn't drown him out, but I was used to it by now, and so I fell asleep. I'm not sure what woke me. Perhaps it was the silence. The rain had stopped, and Happy wasn't snoring. KLM, Coldy. My arms were covered with goosebumps, and tiny hairs were standing straight up on my neck. Moonlight streamed through the broken window, lighting the room. Beside the bed, Happy began to growl softly. Then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Someone was walking down the hall toward my room. Thump, thump, thump. Who's there? I called, grabbing my rifle. Happy was on his feet now. The hair on his back stood on end, and he was growling nonstop. Then I heard something cough, once, twice, a gurgling, strangling, wet sound. The door blew open. I gave a yelp of fright, aiming my gun at the doorway, but in the moonlight, I could see that the hall was empty. Happy stopped growling. He prowled out into the hallway, sniffed around a bit, and then he came back into the room. I got up shakily, closed the door, and bolted it firmly. I wasn't sure if the thumping sound and the coughing had been real or part of a dream, but I wasn't taking any chances. Happy curled up again and started snoring. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the sound of the wind in the trees and watching the moonlight make strange shadows in the room. It was too wet to sleep on the ground outside, and Buck had the only dry spot in the stable. It made sense to stay in the house, but I desperately wanted to get out. I fell into a restless sleep and dreamed I was at a fancy party in a miraculously restored Phelps mansion. I was pouring a drink for a beautiful girl who looked a lot like my Lydia when I heard Happy start to growl. I woke up, sweating, and grabbed my rifle. Thump, thump, thump. I dug. The footsteps were coming down the hall. The bolt flew back and the door burst open. A glowing figure staggered into the room, throat and chest bleeding heavily. It coughed once, twice, a terrible wet sound, full of death. Happy took one look at the figure and leapt through the window, glass shattering everywhere. I followed him, ignoring the shards that tore at my hands and shoulders as I vaulted over the windowsill and out into the tangle of wet grass underneath it. Happy disappeared into the woods. I ran into the stable, and Buck greeted me with a surprised whinny. I flung myself down into the far corner of his stall, keeping Buck's large, warm body between me and the haunted house. I stayed there for the rest of the night. I waited until it was fully daylight before emerging from the stable. I had bandaged my hands roughly with some strips torn from my shirt. There was glass in some of the wounds, but I hadn't wanted to try to take it out with my knife while it was dark. I fed Buck and then went into the house to get my bedroll, my rifle, and my lantern. As I stepped onto the porch, I looked down. A damp, red-brown bloodstain discolored the boards under my feet. I ran into the house, snatched up my things, and left the property as fast as I could. There was no sign of Happy, and he didn't answer when I whistled and called to him. I decided to return to Fort Bragg, have a doctor look at my hands, and finish my circuit later in the week. To my surprise, Lydia was waiting for me outside my house. She looked pale and upset. When she saw my bloodstained shirt and the rough bandages on my hands, she burst into tears. I took her in my arms and asked her what was wrong. "Oh, Tom, I've been so frightened," she gasped. "Happy came running into our house this morning, all covered with blood. I thought something had happened to you. Father rode out at once to look for you. I've been waiting here in case you came home." I told her about seeing the ghost of McInturf, and she scolded me soundly for sleeping in a haunted house. Hi, Nana Patty. Um, she made me promise never to do it again, which I was not reluctant to do. Then she insisted I have the doctor examine my hands. He dug several large glass shards out of my skin, and he also ministered to Happy, which was brave of him. Happy was never quite the same dog again. He was almost friendly to most folks, and he adored Lydia, who he seemed to think had rescued him from the ghost. Lydia insisted that we get married right away. She said it was obvious that anyone foolish enough to sleep in a haunted house, even during a thunderstorm, needed someone with sense to look after them. I didn't argue with her, and I switched circuits with another fellow at the lumber company, so I didn't have to go back to Phelps Place again. Davita? Oh, you're probably laying down still. I was going to ask if you'd ever heard of Fort Bragg. I always thought that was just in North Carolina. Okay, this one is Santa Barbara and Innocence's Revenge. The story began in the grand but lonely home of the village Don. Home of the village Don. He was a stern man of the old school who had lost his wife many years ago. He was a tyrant to his servants and to the locals. His manner was that of a judge, stern but fair to those who kept the law. The Don had one daughter, a beautiful girl named Innocenza, upon whom he doted. She was the only person who could make the Don smile after the death of his wife. He considered his daughter the epitome of grace and beauty, and she was carefully kept from the company of the local children. In the town lived a sea captain, a hearty, red-faced man with a merry tongue. He had a handsome son who liked to sneak into the Don's garden and talk with Innocenza when she was walking alone or during her embroidery among the flowers. The boy, Rodrigo, often journeyed with his father to far-flung places. When he returned, he would in a sense, but it's Innocenza, Innocенca. When he returned, he would entertain the fair young daughter of the Don with tales of his exploits and of the many wondrous places to be found across the sea. After one particularly long journey, Rodrigo returned home to discover that his young playmate had grown into a beautiful young woman. He swung himself up into the branches of the favorite tree he used to climb. Right, yeah. Um, while telling her stories and paused to consider the matter. Aside from his father, Innocenza was the person he loved the most in the world. Now she was old enough to woo and win if he dared. Innocenza was sitting in the garden, working on a delicate piece of embroidery. She'd not noticed the return of her old friend until he called to her. Upon hearing his voice, she dropped her embroidery and ran to the foot of the tree, smiling eagerly and holding out her hands. Rodrigo leapt gracefully to the ground and took her small, soft hands in his large, rough ones. Something in his eyes told Innocenza what was in his heart before he spoke a word. She blushed as red as a rose and lowered her eyes while she told Rodrigo how happy she was to see him. Tucking her hand into the crook of his arm, Rodrigo walked her among the roses and spoke to her of love and many other things. By the time Rodrigo took his leave that night, they were betrothed. But secretly, for Innocenza was afraid that her father would not approve of the match. For a month, they met surreptitiously, aided by Innocenza's maid, Carlotta. Then Rodrigo got a position as first mate on a ship sailing to Brazil. A successful trip would earn him enough money to take a wife and build her a proper home. When he returned, he would brave the Don's wrath and seek Innocenza's hand in marriage. One morning, Innocenza would look out over the sea, each morning, and pray for the safety of her love. And each evening, she would sit opposite her father at the dinner table and plan how she would break the news of her betrothal to him when Rodrigo returned. Here's a illustration. Looks like she got locked up or something. Now Carlotta, Innocenza's maid, also loved Rodrigo. Uh-oh, that's going to be trouble. And she was jealous of his relationship with the Don's daughter. So she went to the Don secretly and told him about Rodrigo and her mistress. The Don was infuriated when he learned that his daughter was engaged to the simple son of a sea captain. He summoned his daughter, and bitter words were exchanged. Finally, he forbade the match and ordered Innocenza locked into the tower room until she came to her senses. For many weeks, she spoke to no one but her maid, Carlotta, and was given only bread to eat and water to drink. Still, she defied her father and waited for her love to come home. Rodrigo returned, bearing with him a great fortune that he had amassed in Brazil. When he learned that Innocenza's father had forbidden the match, he went boldly to the Don's grand house and demanded to speak to its lord. The Don refused to see him, and the servants threw him out. Desperate, Rodrigo sent a message to Carlotta asking her to meet him in the village. When the maid arrived, he sent her back to the house with a letter for Incensa, begging his love to run away with him. Carlotta solemnly swore to take the message to her mistress. Instead, she secretly burned the letter and told Incensa that Rodrigo had betrayed her and was sailing back to Brazil to wed a woman that he had met on his travels. Incensa was heartbroken, and that night she flung herself out of the tower window onto the rocks on the beach below. Hi, Nicole. In his letter, Rodrigo had arranged to meet Incensa on the beach at midnight. As he approached the meeting place, Rodrigo stumbled over the broken body of his love. With a moan of disbelief, he fell to his knees and gathered her into his arms. Carlotta, prepared to lie about her mistress to the handsome young sailor, arrived on the beach moments after Rodrigo and realized that her mistress must have taken her own life in despair over her story. Carlotta was pleased. Now none stood between her and the handsome Rodrigo. Hi, Amy. Still, she was afraid that Rodrigo would blame her for the death of her mistress, so Carlotta thought up a lie to cover her evil deed. When Rodrigo looked up and saw the serving maid standing nearby, Carlotta fell to her knees, pretending to weep, and told him that the Don had found Rodrigo's letter to Incensa and had burned it. Then he locked Carlotta away from her mistress, forbidding her to serve the girl again. In her place, the Don had sent a local girl from the village, one who envied the Don's daughter and wanted to make her unhappy. The girl had told Incensa that Rodrigo had betrayed her, that he loved another girl and was going back to Brazil to marry her. When I heard what the evil girl had done, I went to my mistress against the Don's orders, but I found her room empty. She must have believed the evil one's words and taken her own life, Carlotta.
Oh my goodness.
Carlotta told Rodrigo. Rodrigo hugged the body of his beloved to him and wept. Carlotta, afraid that Rodrigo would be blamed for the death of Incensa, finally persuaded him to leave her body on the beach and return to his home in the village. In the morning, Carlotta gave the alarm, telling the Don that Incensa was missing from the tower room. After a short search, the Don's men found the girl's shattered body on the beach and brought her to the house. The Don had his daughter laid out in state in the great hall of the house with candles surrounding her body. From morning until night, the whole household sat in mourning, grieving the death of the young Incensa. Carlotta dressed herself in black and lay face down beside her mistress' body, moaning and wailing in such an attitude of despair that the other servants took turns comforting her, never suspecting that it was an act. As for the Don, he spent hour after hour kneeling in his study, weeping for his daughter and repenting of the way he had treated her in life. That night, around midnight, a huge gust of wind burst through the front door, slamming it against the wall. Upon hearing the sound, the Don, who was praying alone in his study, came hurrying into the great hall and went to stand beside his daughter's coffin. From her place beside the body of his mistress, Carlotta sat up and stared toward the gaping black doorway. A small light appeared at the center of the door. It grew brighter, taller, whiter. The spirit of Incensa appeared within the light. She pointed accusingly at the maid Carlotta. Then she raised her arms. The wind whipped around her spectral form, flickering the candles that surrounded her dead body until a spark lit one of the large tapestries that decorated the hall. Suddenly, the great hall was in flames. The burning tapestry wrapped itself around Carlotta, who struggled in vain to free herself as she was engulfed by the fire. Hearing the serving maid's screams, the servants rushed into the room, carrying buckets of water, but the fire was already out of control. The fire rose up in a wall. trapping the Don beside his daughter's coffin. Suddenly, the spirit of Incensa appeared before the encroaching flames, with her hand outstretched to her father. The Don took her hand, and together they walked through the fire and out of the house. When she had taken her father to safety, Incensa's ghost disappeared. Down on the beach, the Don and his servants watched as the fire spread through the ground floor until it reached a secret magazine cache in the armory. The resulting explosion destroyed the house and much of the Don's wealth with it. The villagers came running to the scene of devastation, seeking ways to assist the Don and his household. Just for a moment, the Don came face to face with Rodrigo. In the light of the burning building, the two men stared at each other. Then the shoulders of the older man slumped in sudden despair. In one day, the Don had lost his daughter, his home, and most of his fortune. He turned away and buried his face in his hands. Rodrigo hesitated for a moment and then placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. "Come, father," Rodrigo said. "Come and stay with me." Gently, Rodrigo led the Don away and took him to live in his little house by the sea. Oh, you're welcome, Nicole. This one's called Lady in Lace from Pebble Beach, California. By the time we had finished unpacking our suitcases, my wife had already grilled the staff about every ghost reported to reside in the area. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts, but my wife cannot get enough of them. She claims that she is psychic and tells me she can feel the spirits of the departed wherever she goes. That is fine with me, as long as she leaves me in peace. Hey, wait, we already read this one. Didn't we? We read this one, I think. Bless you.
Thank you.
How did I read this one already? Maybe not. Might just be something similar. As long as she leaves me in peace to play golf. Whisper to me, said, "Bless you."
Thank you.
And watch the latest on the sports networks. I don't care if she meets every ghost in Pebble Beach. The girl at the front desk says there's a ghost that walks along the 17-mile drive on foggy nights. Helen trilled from the bathroom where she was refreshing her makeup. She's called the Lady in Lace. Isn't that romantic? People say she's the ghost of Donna Maria del Carmen Barreto, the woman who used to own much of the land hereabouts. They think she returns to keep watch over her land. Helen came out of the bathroom. "George, have you seen my shoes?" "Over by the door, honey," I said, turning up the volume on the television. I had heard so many ghost stories over the years that I automatically tuned them out in favor of sports. "There's another theory about the ghost," Helen said brightly, sitting down on the edge of the bed to put on her shoes. "People say the white flowing lace gown that she wears resembles a wedding gown, so they think that she might be the ghost of a jilted bride who was left standing at the altar. The girl at the desk is in favor of this theory because her boyfriend once saw the ghost and he said she looked very sad and lonely, as if she were about to cry. That's nice, dear, I said automatically. The girl says the lady in lace can be seen near the ghost tree, and at least one couple has claimed that she walked right past them while they were sitting on the rocks at Pescadero Point, Helen said, standing up and walking over to the table where we had piled all the tourist brochures. So I thought we could take a ride up there and see what we could see. All right with you, George? That's nice, dear, I repeated. At this juncture, my husbandly circuits kicked in and quickly replayed the conversation through my mind. Aghast, I turned on the volume on the television and looked at my wife. I can't run around chasing ghosts. Fred and I are playing golf this afternoon, I said, which, may I remind you, was the whole point of this trip. I didn't mean right now, George, Helen said calmly. Lynn and I are taking a tour this afternoon. I meant tonight after dinner, once it gets dark. The girl at the desk said most of the ghost sightings take place at night. I sighed with relief and settled back into the recliner. As long as it isn't too late at night, I said, I need to get a good night's sleep to stay sharp. I don't want Fred beating me on the links because I stayed up late chasing ghosts. We couldn't have that now, could we? Helen said dryly. I ignored her sarcasm and turned up the volume of the television. Helen sighed and left the room to find Lynn. I trounced Fred on the golf course that afternoon and was in high spirits after a pleasant dinner. So, when are we going ghost hunting? I asked Helen after we said goodnight to Fred and Lynn. We can go tonight if you want, said Helen. Although I wish it was foggy, most of the ghost sightings along the 17-mile drive have taken place on a dark, foggy night. I wonder why, I mused. Good night, Doug. See, it's working. It's getting you to sleep. I wonder why, I mused dryly. Helen ignored me. Still, we may get lucky, she said. Come on, I have directions. It was a beautiful, clear night. The moon rose high in the sky, its light shimmering on the ocean waves. I drove slowly, enjoying the beautiful scenery. Have a good night, Doug. Sweet dreams. While Helen kept a sharp lookout for any will-o-wisps wearing lace, she didn't see any. We spent nearly a half hour lurking near the ghost tree where the lady in lace was often seen. Hoping for a sighting, we saw nothing. Next, Helen said we had to visit Pescadero Point, where many folks had seen the ghost, including the couple who claimed the lady in lace had walked right past them while they were sitting on the rocks. Helen wanted us to repeat the couple's actions, hoping that the ghost might stroll past us too. I didn't mind. It was a beautiful night, and I was out with my beautiful wife. If watching for a ghost overlooking a romantic moonlit view was part of the deal, so be it. We walked hand in hand down to the rocks overlooking the Pacific and sat down together, cuddling close and whispering to each other like a couple of teenagers. I sighed happily, watching the sparkling light dance upon the ocean waves. In the moonlight, Helen looked just... Hi, Josie. I love your name, by the way, Josie West. In the moonlight, Helen looked just as young and beautiful as the day I married her. Helen shivered suddenly under my arm. I squeezed her close and said, Are you cold, honey? Do you ever want to go back to the hotel? No, I'm fine. Just a sudden chill, she said. A goose walked over my grave. I chuckled a little at the old expression, giving her a hug. Over her shoulder, I caught a glimpse of white. I stared at it. It moved closer, and I saw it was a woman walking toward us. Her head was slightly bowed, and her face looked so sad that it nearly broke my heart. She was dressed in a long flowing gown made out of lace. I gasped. Helen turned in my arms, trying to see what had caught my attention. She stiffened and drew in a deep breath when she saw the woman in white. "Now don't get excited," I murmured in Helen's ear. "It has to be a trick." We told the girl at the front desk that we were going to try to see the ghost at the point. She probably asked her friends to give us a ghostly experience. Helen nodded, her eyes glued to the approaching figure. My skin broke out in goosebumps as I watched the lady in lace. I kept reminding myself that this was a trick. Around me, the temperature dropped like a stone, and I shivered as the figure moved past the rocks where we were seated. She was so close that I could see the lace of her filmy dress swaying as she moved. The woman did not utter a word, but I could hear the soft sound of her feet as she walked along. When the figure was exactly opposite my seat, an icy cold wave cut through me like a knife. With it came a feeling of mental agony, such as I had never felt before. I gasped aloud. The woman continued down toward the shore, and I saw that the bottom of her beautiful lace gown, it could really have been a bridal gown, was dragging in the dirt. She passed in front of a gnarled cypress tree, and I realized suddenly that I could see the tree right through her body. She seemed to glimmer in the moonlight, as ethereal as the dancing light on the ocean waves. "Hey, Tracy." "Good Lord," I whispered, shaken to the core. She disappeared from sight behind some rocks. "Thanks, Nicole." I leapt up and ran after her, but when I reached the rocks, there was nothing to see but empty beach. Helen hurried up behind me and caught my arm. She was pale and shaking. "Let's get out of here," she said hoarsely. I nodded and half pulled, half carried her to the car. We drove in silence back to the hotel. I kept looking over at Helen, sitting quietly in the passenger seat. Tears were coursing down her cheeks. I started to ask her what was wrong, but she motioned me to silence. I helped her out of the car and kept my arm around her as we went up to our room. Helen broke away from me then and cast herself on the bed, weeping. I sat beside her, rubbing her back and wondering what to do. Finally, she sat up and wiped her eyes. "Oh, George, it was so sad, so horribly sad. I could feel the pain coming off of her in waves, and there was nothing I could do to comfort her." I nodded. I was not psychic like my wife, but I too had felt the sorrow from that white figure, and my hands shook every time I remembered seeing the tree right through her body and the glow about her that was brighter than the moonlight. I had never believed in ghosts until now. I thought I had had enough ghosts. I think I've had enough of ghosts for the time being," said Helen, taking a deep, calming breath. "Maybe tomorrow Lynn and I can go shopping." "That would probably be a good idea," I said. I gave her a comforting hug and we went to bed. "Oh, I'm sorry, Josie." This one is out of Hollywood. This will probably be the last one for tonight. I just want to show you guys something really quick. Hold on, guys. Show you my friend. Her funeral will be tomorrow. She's only 44. I've known her since 1997 when I started working at Movie Gallery with her. And she was only 19. And we became, close friends for a lot of years. She was another one that was an old soul. We don't even know how she died. I still can't believe this girl is gone. I've hardly been able to sleep. It's just so weird. I just keep, thinking of her. And Isaiah liked her so much. Isaiah was a baby, just a few months old when we first met her. And over the years, she would come over, she would play video games with them. She was really a sweet person. So much fun. Always had kind of a sheltered life in a way. She was the baby of the family. She had 2 older brothers. But she wanted to be an actress, so she was in a comedy troupe from Chicago. She would go and do things with them, and her wake was today. I didn't go. I didn't. It's just, I can't believe she's gone. Dave was shocked. Isaiah said that's horrible. I sent Shelley the obituary a couple days ago, and she said, as soon as I got it, and Shelley said, oh my gosh. She's like, I just saw her. I just saw her in the store like 2 weeks ago. And I said, how did she seem? And she said, she seemed totally fine. She's like, she talked to me about working in the bookstore at the university, at Valpo University. She said she noticed me first. She came over and we were talking. She's like, yeah, she seemed perfectly fine. But in the obituary, it says she passed away after a long illness. All I can think of is it's her lupus. And something was going on with that because she was very young when she was diagnosed with that. I would say she was maybe 21, 22. She was diagnosed with that. I can't get over it. I just wanted to share. Isn't she a pretty girl? She was always heavy set. But we had so freaking much fun together. When we worked together, I would ask her, would you pretend like you're from England or whatever? So she would do this English accent waiting on the customers. It was so funny. Other times she would act like she was deaf and doing like sign language or having them write it down. She was just so fun, And the last time I really spent time with her was at her mom's funeral. That was just a few years ago. Her mom was only 68. And her dad had already passed away. I used to go over and visit her father. Shelley and I would stop by and visit her dad when we were out on our scooters. So her parents were divorced. They had been divorced, and Mildred lived with her mother. And that I remember her telling me that, Nana Patty, when she was first diagnosed. She's because we were talking about it, and I remember, I don't know what I had said, but I still remember her words were, yeah, but my body, because I think she had went to the doctor is what it was, and I didn't think anything would be wrong with her. That's what it was. We were both working. I was at one cat register, she was at the other, and we were just talking away, and she said, yeah, but except my results aren't so good. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I have lupus. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Mildred, no. Well, you'll be okay, though. You'll be okay. Because I didn't really know what that was that much, And she's like, no, well, she's like, yeah, but my body can attack itself. My body will be attacking itself. And I don't know, we had so many good talks and so many good laughs. Her mom was from Puerto Rico. I believe her father was too. Her mom would cook all this yummy Puerto Rican food, Puerto Rican rice, those empanada things. Her funeral will be tomorrow, and that's okay, Anna, or Aurora. Body does attack itself. I get the IV once a month to try to prevent that. Her birthday is on New Year's Eve. So, of course, every New Year's, I send her a message. I cannot get over this. Even though over the years, we have lost touch, but whenever I would see her, we just had that connection, and she's so much younger than I am. She's only 44. But there'd be nobody that I would know. My friend Jennifer that told me about it, she's in shock as well. Hi, 10th Angel. She's like, I am just in shock, if you go to the wake, please, give them my condolences. And I said, well, I'm not going to go because I'm not going to know anybody there. Both of her parents are dead. I never knew her brothers. I only saw them from a distance at her mom's funeral. Really, Nicole? Really, Nana Patty? I want to know what happened, but there's nobody really that I can, find out. I wrote, how you can write in these things in the funeral home, I wrote a message there and everything to her, and I know her brothers will see it. I just can't believe it though, Aurora. I wrote a lot of that in here, Tracy. But my boss, well, she's my old boss, Jennifer. And she said she just had surgery, so she's not going. And she said she probably won't find out what happened anyway, because, she was close to Mildred's mother. And since Mildred's mother is not around, wish I would have known. I would have known that, she was so bad off. But Shelley said 2 weeks ago she looked perfectly fine. Really, QB? It can just come out of nowhere. But why did her brothers decide to write in the obituary after a long illness? Would they just be referring to lupus? It could happen that fast? Yeah, it was March 9th. They're having the funeral tomorrow. That seems kind of long, doesn't it? March 9th till, well, today now would be the 17th. Well, 8 days. Maybe they had to wait for people to come from out of state or from Puerto Rico, maybe, or her and I would just talk so much about movies and the apocalypse, and we loved, thinking of all the scary scenarios. I would think she would have had the shot, the vaccination, I would think. And like I keep saying it, but like I said, Shelley said, oh, Mildred looked, she looked great. You wouldn't think there was anything wrong with her. She had a beautiful soul. Isn't that funny how you don't really talk to anybody regular or anything like that on the regular, but then you find out that they're gone, and all of a sudden it hits you and you're remembering everything that you had with her. And I couldn't even sleep the first night I heard. When 9/11 happened, boy, her and I were freaking out. We'd be on the phone for hours and hours talking away about all this, everything that could happen or what happened, just everything. And then, we just, like, one night there was a tornado, and she lives quite a few miles away from me, maybe, I don't know, 5 miles or something. And there was this emergency thing, and like a couple of nuts, we're watching the emergency broadcast, and I'm on the phone, she's on the phone, and we, just silly stuff like that, but, and then after it was all over, she's like, that was so much fun. And I'm like, it was, because we had each other so scared, so terrified. She came to my cottage. She was a night person too. She was up all night, would sleep during the day. She probably had to change that with her last couple of jobs because they were day jobs, but she was normally a night person like most of us. Yeah. Yeah, I do have great memories. It just, wow. Just can't believe that girl's gone. She never got to get married. She had a boyfriend for a while. She always wanted to have a boyfriend and everything. Yeah, but Tracy, we haven't, hung out for so long. When we'd run into each other at the store or something like that, or, oh, we have to get together, blah, 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 that kind of thing. It just seems like so many people are dying, doesn't it? Or is that just me? Yeah, it just seems like so many people are dying. Really, Steph? Yeah, look at, Dave's nephew. I just say Dave's nephew because he's on his brother's son, how he died, last December 2nd. Oh no, Lisa, Nia. Say prayers for your sister. I'm so sorry. Does she have COVID? So sorry, Lisa Nia. Then another 4 years ago, I lost my two best friends. Oh gosh, 10th Angel. Oh, Lisa. Not COVID. She already went through this in June and went into hospice room, but she turned around. Miracle. Now here we go again. COPD and keeps getting infections. How old is she, Lisa? Oh, and another person that died that I know it was just like a couple months ago. He is mine and Dave's age. He worked at the same mill as Dave. He's retired, and he was just found dead in his house. We don't even know why. He was my cousin's husband. So Rodney, he's dead. Jill died 2018 from early onset Alzheimer's, believe it or not. And she was only in her 50s and an absolutely beautiful girl. And that Alzheimer's aged her overnight. They never said it was Alzheimer's, but I mean, it had to have been. It had to have been. She ended up in a nursing home and everything. She's 58. Her and my mom live in Florida, just those two different homes. My mom had to have her live with her and care for her after this last illness. Mom's 83 and struggles with agoraphobia. Oh my gosh. Mine goes from 93 to 89. Now I'm tired. My friend lost both of his parents in one day from COVID back in January. What? Does all this seem normal? That is so sad, Lisa. Does this all seem normal? It just all seems so abnormal to me. Wow, that is crazy, Josie. Yeah, Steph. Aw, Lisa Nia. Prayers for you, your sister, your mom. It's just crazy. Now I'm going to ask you guys all a personal question. Do you guys think about your own death? Like when you're going to die, how you're going to die? Hi, Kristen. I am not over the last time it was so happy. Oh my gosh. Right, Lisa. Yes, let us know, like QB said. So we're all doing that same thing. Nicole, I guess that's true. Wow, Josie. What do you mean, Tracy? Your daughter's having a baby. This girl, congratulations. I wonder if she would remember me. I just said that to my daughter today. Well, it depends on how old she is whenever you pass away. Have you, 10th Asia? Did you right before your surgery? Kevin, you're only 50. Done a lot of ELT and dying. But there's a lot to it. Not death. He doesn't toss out all these collectibles. Yes, I'm going to be 62 March 28th, and I do think of my death, unfortunately, but I know. We needed that, Lisa. My mom died when my daughter was 8 months old. It breaks my heart that they didn't know each other. But my daughter said she's seen my mom. Wow, Steph. Kevin, yes, it does. Goes by faster and faster. Aw, Nicole. Bless you, Lex.
Thank you.
Oh, QB, did you get your box yet? Please tell me you did. Enjoy life every day. Aurora said, bless you, Lex. You're giggling. Thank you. 9 and 11. Tracy Claus. Hey, Lexi, bless you. Well, I guess I'll read another one and then that'll do it for the night. Nicole Griffith, bless you, Lexi. We'll read this one about Hollywood and then we'll go to bed. No, and you didn't have to. Oh, but, well, you'll be getting it. It went out Wednesday along with Carolyn's stuff and a few other things that people had bought. Kristen Vita Sib, bless you, Lexi. No, I didn't know that, Josie. I'm organizing my items and I found more. Oh, Italy Capodimonte items, so I'll let Carolyn know so I can get them to the people I promised to anyone who wants them. You should come on and sell those, Lisa. Look how Lisa D and all those, they all love that stuff. Yes, Hollywood Story. Here we go, Kevin. Kevin's like, okay, let's get back on track. This one's called Betrayed. It was a dark and stormy night, which, as everyone knows, is the very best time for telling ghost stories. Our 3 teenage grandchildren were visiting us were visiting us for their spring break, and they had spent the day on a bus tour of Hollywood. Now we all curled up in the living room around the fireplace with the lights turned out and listened to thunder rumbling outside. Good, Lisa. Okay, guys. We all know we're more alike than different, aren't we? Got a lot of the same thoughts and fears. Okay. Tell us a ghost story, Grandpop, my grandson Bill said casually. There must be ghosts in Hollywood. Dozens, I said, taking out my pipe. Abby, my wife of 45 years, gave me a stern look. She hated it when I smoked in the house, but said nothing. I lit up and puffed for a bit, staring into the flames, letting the pounding rain, the flash of lightning, and the crash of thunder set the mood. When the grandkids began stirring restlessly, I took the stem of the pipe out of my mouth and looked at them thoughtfully. The oldest, Claire, was 19 and looked skeptical, which was appropriate. At the age of 19, I was skeptical about the whole world and wouldn't have believed in ghosts if one had walked right through my bedroom wall. Becky was 17 and had a rather nervous disposition. She looked terrified already, and I hadn't started talking yet. But she was eager too, and I knew she would feel horribly cheated if I refused to tell them a ghost story. Billy was 15 and absolutely bloodthirsty. Some of the urban legends I'd heard him swapping with his friends the last time we visited their home would make my ghost stories seem tame. The final character in the scenario, my wife, Abby, sat rocking in her glider, knitting a scarf. If this makes her sound delightfully old-fashioned, let me rephrase the description. My still blonde and determined to remain so wife sat knitting a highly modern, fluffy-looking scarf in electric colors, copied from a picture in the latest fashion magazine, which lay open by her side. She gave me an ironic stare. I smiled demurely back, which I knew would infuriate her, and began. I suppose I could tell you about the ghost in the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. An old mirror there sometimes shows the reflection of Marilyn Monroe. And I have heard that the ghost of actor Montgomery Clift paces the hall outside room 928, where he stayed for several months while he was making a film. I paused tantalizingly, Bill leaned forward, his eyes sparkling. Or perhaps I might begin with the ghost of Lon Chaney Sr., who played the original Phantom of the Opera, and who, they say, may still be seen running along the catwalks of Studio 28 wearing a dark cape, I continued. Thunder rumbled most appropriately at that juncture. Becky gave a small shriek of terrified delight. Claire smirked and leaned against the back of her chair. Or maybe I could tell you the story of the funeral procession of Bela Lugosi, the original Dracula. You know, the one where a ghost took control of the hearse on its way to the cemetery and forced the man at the wheel to drive down Hollywood Boulevard? Apparently, the ghost would not let go of the wheel until the driver crossed the intersection at Vine Street. People claimed it was the ghost of Bela Lugosi making his way one last time down Hollywood Boulevard as a final farewell gesture to his beloved town. His ghost took control of the car, Bill repeated. Nice. Boring, Claire said. I think I'll go upstairs and read for a while. Go right ahead, I said amiably. Meanwhile, I'll tell everyone else my favorite Hollywood ghost story. Tracy. Claire settled back into her chair. I think I'll stay a while longer, she said casually. I suppressed a grin and told the children the following tale. Around 1900, there was a lovely 3-story inn in Beverly Glen where many people stayed overnight after going to the theater. A wealthy landowner was a frequent visitor, along with his very attractive wife. Sometimes the landowner's wife would come along would come alone to stay at the inn. On one of these visits, she met a handsome young man. He was a bit of a dandy, always wearing outlandish clothes in his favorite color, yellow, but the wife liked him very much. Too much. The landowner's wife and the dandy began meeting regularly, and they always together stayed at the inn. Then a friend of the family told the wealthy landowner about his wife's indiscreet behavior. The man was infuriated. Okay, Lisa. He grabbed a scythe from the family farm and rode his horse into town, hoping to catch his wife and the dandy at the inn. The husband leapt off his horse, raced past the trembling innkeeper, and pounded up the stairs to the room he always occupied with his wife. Bursting through the door, he raised the scythe above his head and cut off the head of the dandy as his wife screamed and shrank away. For this crime of passion, the wealthy landowner was executed, and his unfaithful wife inherited all of his money. Okay, good night, Meg. I'm glad you stuck around. Thank you for coming. Took out. I don't know if she ever went back to the inn where her husband killed her lover, but her lover did return. They say that from that day to this, the dandy's ghost, dressed in glowing yellow with a fancy opera cape and a black bow tie around his headless neck, has often been seen standing beside the roadway, waiting for his love to return to him. And in the old roadhouse, the ghost of the husband can be heard bursting through the front door and pounding up the stairs to the room on the 3rd floor where he was betrayed. Thunder rumbling again, and everyone shivered. Claire finally spoke. What happened to the inn? It was turned into apartments, I said, haunted ones. Several of the tenants had mysterious encounters with the yellow dandy, and a couple living on the third floor room were terrified nightly by the sound of the betrayed husband running up the steps. The house is empty now. Well, that's enough ghosts for me, Abby said, casting off the final stitches of her scarf and standing up. I'm going to bed. The grandkids followed her out the door, leaving me alone in my chair, staring at the fire. I reflected for a moment on how lucky I was. I had a wonderful wife, great kids, and the best grandkids a man could hope for. I felt sorry for the betrayed husband who had lost his wife and his life and had never been able to rest in peace. From that day to this, yes, I was very lucky indeed. I snuffed out my pipe and went upstairs to bed. You're funny. Well, that was kind of lame. I wanted something better than that for Hollywood. It was really kind of lame. But I guess we'll call it an evening, right, guys? Love y'all, you guys. Thanks for coming and listening. See you next time, okay? One more? Okay, Steph. All right, one more. Lexi's laughing. She heard me. She's cute how she giggles in there. Let's see. Let's skip around here. Trying to find some good ones. How about the lonely grave out of Nevada City, California? The birth was not going well. Christopher did not need to see the look on the midwife's face to know that. The baby had come too early, much too early. The doctor was 3 days hard ride away. They were lucky that the midwife had been home when the contractions started. Thanks, Meg. Love you too, girl. Okay, Kevin. But that had been almost 2 days ago. Christopher didn't think that the labor was supposed to take this long. His Maud was in terrible pain that did not stop between contractions. Every time Maud cried out, Christopher wanted to run to her to make the pain stop. Finally, the midwife threw him out of the house because his pacing was making her nervous and she needed to concentrate. Christopher sat on the stoop, his head in his hands. The hours passed slowly. Finally, the midwife came out the front door and found him. Christopher read the news on her face before she said a word. The baby, his little son, was dead. Oh, and Maud was dying. The midwife sent him in to sit with her. There was nothing more she could do. Maud lay very still on their small bed. Her tiny, premature son was cradled in her arms. She barely had the strength to hold the baby, but refused to let go. He looks just like you, Chris, she whispered weakly. I want to name him David after your father. Christopher tried to smile. Maud did not seem to realize the baby was dead. It was probably better that way. David's a fine name, Christopher managed to speak without choking. Maud smiled and began crooning a lullaby to her dead baby, her voice growing fainter as death drew near. Christopher crouched beside her, his hand on her arm, too stricken to speak. Then Maud looked at him out of her clear gray eyes and said, Chris, I want to be buried back east. Don't talk about that now, Christopher whispered, trying to hold back his tears. I want you to bury us beside my mother, Maud said. Promise me, Chris. The tears were streaming down Christopher's face. He nodded. I promise. Maud closed her eyes. I love you, you know, she said. I love you too, Christopher answered, squeezing her arm. Maud did not reply, and Christopher knew she was dead. The midwife came into the room. She saw at a glance what had happened and urged Christopher to go outside while she cleaned up mother and baby. Christopher saddled up his horse and rode into town to talk to the preacher about the funeral. He was too stunned to cry. The whole town turned out for the funeral, which was held in the small church where Christopher and Maud were married. Christopher could not bear to be parted from Maud, so he arranged to have her buried beneath the single tall pine on a gently sloping knoll near their home on the hill. I'm sorry, Maud, he whispered to her headstone. I just couldn't send you and David back east. Your family have each other back east, but you and David are all I have here with me. Christopher visited the grave every night after finishing his shift in the mines. As the winter passed, he grew thin and pale. He dreaded each day, knowing that Maud would not be there. He dreaded the nights even more, for darkness brought nightmares in which Maud appeared to him, gazing sorrowfully and looking toward the east. Christopher would awaken, racked with guilt, knowing that Maud was reproaching him for breaking his promise to bury her back east. His neighbors grew worried about him and sent the minister over to see what could be done to help him. Christopher found himself pouring out the whole story to the gentle, godly old man. The minister tried to reassure Christopher, telling him that Maud would understand and forgive him for keeping her grave near to him. But despite the minister's reassurances, the nightmares continued into the spring. Each day, more and more fragrant wildflowers bloomed across the knoll. Christopher began bringing flowers to lay at the foot of the grave each night. On the night of their wedding anniversary, Christopher threw himself across the flower-strewn grave, head buried in his arms, as he tried to control his grief. As he lay there, the stillness of the night seemed to deepen. A light breeze tousled his hair and swayed the branches of the pine tree. Here's an illustration of the lonely grave. Meg. At that moment, Christopher heard a soft voice crooning a lullaby. He started upright, searching about for Maud. He heard a gurgle from an infant, a happy sound of contentment. The breeze died away, and the branches of the pine tree stilled. Then a shining light seemed to descend from the tree, from the dark sky, and hover above him and the small grave under the tree. Christopher heard the singing again, and the happy laugh of a small child. Maud, he asked. Davy? The light caressed his face. For a moment, he felt a light weight on his lap, like the weight of a small child. Someone grabbed his thumb and gurgled happily. Someone else chuckled in his ear and tousled his hair the way Maud used to. A kiss brushed his cheek, and then there was darkness. Christopher sat still for a long time, a sense of peace filling him. For the first time, he realized that Maud's body was gone, but her spirit was still with him. Wherever she and Davy were, they were happy. Okay. Christopher rose. I miss you, Maud, and you, my little Davy, he told the gravestone. That night, Christopher dreamed of Maud and Davy. They were playing in a beautiful garden that was radiant with light. They looked up as he approached them, smiling and waving. Little Davy laughed up at his father, and Maud took his hand. It's not your time yet, love, but we will see you by and by. She kissed him. Christopher woke up, tears streaming down his cheek. He knew the nightmares were gone forever. He slept deeply that night for the first time since Maud's death. When he awoke, he realized he was looking forward to the new day. That one wasn't too bad, huh? I'll do one more, Aurora. One more. This one's out of Los Angeles. The Devil and the Prisoner. Now Antonio was a merry soul who liked nothing better than to drink the night away with his friends. They would laugh and tell jokes and drink toast until none of them could see straight, and walking became a bit of a problem. Antonio was a bachelor, and he liked being a bachelor, but his parents were growing old and kept begging him to get married. So Antonio finally married the prettiest, richest girl in Los Angeles, much to the delight of his parents. You would think such a marriage would be a success, but no. Unfortunately for Antonio, he had forgotten to look behind the pretty face before he proposed, and so had found himself married to a shrewish woman who nagged him from dawn until dusk. At least once a week, his new bride complained to her father about the laziness of the man he had chosen as a son in law. Then Antonio would be lectured by his father in law, berated by his mother in law, and threatened with violence by his brother in law if he did not treat his sister right. His only refuge from such a horrible existence was in the bottle. At the end of these weekly torture sessions, Antonio would go out drinking. Antonio's friends all felt sorry for him. They all knew his wife and felt that he had a good excuse for his wild habits. They took turns buying him drinks and listening sympathetically to his predicament. He had a rather good imitation of his father-in-law that he could be persuaded to do after 5 or 6 drinks. It always made his friends laugh. One evening, after a particularly long lecture from his father-in-law, Antonio's wife threatened to leave him. One can only hope, Antonio muttered aloud. That did it. His wife was furious. She stomped out of the house to find her brother, who was always threatening to pummel Antonio. Fearing for his health, Antonio fled to the local tavern in search of solace. After many drinks with his friends, Antonio stood up on a chair and described what he would do to his brother-in-law if he got the chance. One of his particularly spectacular gestures overbalanced his chair, and Antonio crashed to the floor. As it turned out, this was a good thing, since the brother-in-law in question came through the front door just at that moment. Quick as a wink, Antonio crawled away under the tables and lit out the window. Unfortunately, he landed on the local constable, who happened to be talking to the owner of the tavern at that moment. Well, the constable did not take too kindly to being knocked off his feet by a drunken man. He frog marched Antonio to the jail and locked him up tight. At first, Antonio thought this might be a blessing in disguise, as it made him inaccessible to his brother-in-law and his wife might be persuaded to make good on her threat to leave him. Then he realized that if his father, who had a heart condition, ever found out that his only son was in jail, it would be the death of him. Antonio remembered a spell that one of his friends had taught him that would summon the devil if ever one needed his aid. So Antonio staggered around in a circle 3 times, bumping at least once into the little cot that they had left in his cell, and called out to the devil to come to him. At once, a voice hailed Antonio from outside. He felt his way carefully over to the window and peered out through the bars. A tall, dark, whiskered chap with pointy ears and a devilish smile sat atop a black horse. Small horns peeked out of his well-combed hair. So you wish to make a pact with the devil, do you? The man asked. Yes, I do, Antonio slurred. You wouldn't want to take my wife, would you? No, sir, the devil prompted. I know your wife. She is a shrew without equal. Offer me something else. Mildly disappointed, Antonio thought for a while and then offered the devil his best horse in exchange for his freedom. Done, said the devil. Just stick your head through these bars and I'll pull you out. This sounded sensible to Antonio. He pushed his head obligingly through the bars of the window. At first, they seemed hard and unyielding. Then he felt the devil tug on his ears, and the bars began to bend like rubber. His head was nearly through when he heard his wife's voice shouting his name from up the street. Holy Mary, Mother of God, Antonio swore. The devil yelped as if he had been stung when he heard the name of the Virgin Mary. He let go of Antonio's ears. With a popping sound, the devil and the black horse disappeared, leaving Antonio with his head firmly wedged between the bars of the window. And that was how his wife and brother-in-law found him. The jailer was summoned, and he was forced to saw the bars clean through to get him out. As they started for home, Antonio's wife began berating him for his drinking, for getting himself thrown into jail, and for getting his head stuck trying to escape so she wouldn't know he had been imprisoned. This was the last straw. Antonio stopped right in the middle of the road and began yelling at his wife and brother-in-law. Escape? Of course I was trying to escape, Antonio shouted, but not to fool you. It was for the sake of my good parents. With my father's heart condition, I was afraid the news might kill him, so I made a deal with the devil. I asked the devil to help me get out of prison in exchange for you. And do you know what? The devil would not take you. He said you were a shrew without equal, and he was right. If it wasn't for my parents' health, I would have been happy to stay in prison for the rest of my life if it meant never having to see you again. Leaving his wife and brother-in-law staring after him in shock, Antonio stalked home and went to bed with a hangover. The next morning, his wife brought him breakfast in bed. He could tell from her eyes that she had been weeping. Meg. We looked at the bars again this morning, his wife said, avoiding his eyes. There was no way you could have gotten caught between them. They were too close together, unless the devil did help you. Did he really call me a shrew without equal? Her voice caught on the last word, and she began to weep. Antonio sat up cautiously. His head was pounding. He wanted to be quietly sick and then go back to sleep. But he sensed that this was a turning point in his marriage. Yes, that's what he said, Antonio answered his wife. She nodded her head sadly. My brother said the same thing last night. He said I treated you shamefully, and that if his wife ever complained about him the way I complained about you, that he would go out drinking every night and never come home. She set the tray down on the side table and looked Antonio in the eyes. I am sorry, she said. I'll try to do better. She left the room and closed the door behind her. Much to Antonio's surprise, his wife kept her word. She would never be the ideal wife, but she stopped complaining about him to her family, and she tried helping him around the house more and nagging less. With a more peaceful house to come home to, Antonio found less need to spend the evenings at the tavern, which made his wife happier. And once his wife had a few children, she became too busy to nag at him, which made Antonio happier. They never again spoke about Antonio's pact with the devil. Oh, Meg. Okay, guys, everybody have a good night and day, okay? See you guys. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.